I rocked a gold jumpsuit. Cantor Novik donned bell-bottoms. We both wrapped pink boas around our necks, and together we belted out Elton John melodies. No, we weren't at the disco, but instead it was the 14th of Adar, 5780. We had gathered in the Brody Chapel to celebrate Purim. With news becoming increasingly focused on COVID-19, we quickly created a Zoom account to stream the Purim spiel. A handful of congregants joined us from home, while the chapel was full as we sang songs, dressed up, and ate hamantashen. It was a joyous event as we remembered Esther standing up to Haman. Now, 6 months later, I stand on this bima in an empty sanctuary and can't help but reflect on the last time that we gathered in our building. I find a fitting parallel between the holidays of Purim and Yom Kippur. One might be surprised by this. It seems that Purim and Yom Kippur are two holidays that are totally antithetical to each other. On Purim, we are supposed to drink excessively, and on Yom Kippur, we are supposed to refrain from all sustenances. On Purim, we wear costumes, shake groggers, and act silly. On Yom Kippur, we wear all white, sit solemnly, and take a close internal look at who we are. The Vilna Gaon, an 18th century Lithuanian rabbi, made a connection between Yom Kippur and Purim by using the biblical name of Yom Kippur, Yom HaKippurim. He taught that Yom HaKippurim does not mean the Day of Atonements, but instead Yom HaKippurim means a day like Purim. According to his interpretation, celebrating Yom Kippur is an attempt to mirror the holiday of Purim. 2 days that seem completely incompatible become inextricably linked. On Purim, we are to put on our masks, and on Yom Kippur, we are to remove our masks, examine who we are, and allow for vulnerability so we can grow. Before I go any further, let me be very clear. On this Yom Kippur, we should not remove our masks if we can't physically distance from other people. We know that literal mask wearing during pandemics save lives. On Yom Kippur, instead, we are to take off the mask we hide behind. It is by doing so that we open ourselves up to learning and growing. So this evening, on Kol Nidre, as we enter this period of soul searching, I ask us to be vulnerable and discuss the privilege that we as a predominantly white congregation have. I'm sure that that word privilege has already made some of you uneasy. We as Jews are a small minority in America. We've had to struggle for our place, and we don't see that struggle as a sign of privilege. We continue to experience anti-Semitism, horrific acts of violence in Jersey City and Muncie just this past year, swastikas in our schools, celebrities and athletes suggesting that Jews are responsible for the majority of wickedness that goes on across the globe, conspiracy theorists accusing Jews of causing the coronavirus. No doubt, we must continue to confront this upward trend in anti-Semitism. When we look at our security budget of Temple Emanu-El, how can I say we have privilege? When our congregation partners with the Anti-Defamation League as the signature synagogue to run programs on BDS and online hate speech, how can I say we have privilege? When last Kol Nidre, my sermon focused on the very real rise of anti-Semitism, how can I say we have privilege? When our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents came here with nothing and worked so hard to get here where we are today, how can I say we have privilege? When we have been seen and treated like the other, how can I say we have privilege? I can say we have privilege because those of us who are white in the main have the ability to mask our Judaism if we choose. We can tuck our Star of David necklace under our shirt. We can take off our kippur when we feel uncomfortable. And some have even changed their names. That is privilege. On a daily basis, white Jews enjoy the same privilege as other white people. People don't cross the street when they see me walking towards them. Store owners don't hover over white Jewish teenagers out of suspicion of shoplifting. White Jews don't die of COVID 3 times more than the rest of the population. Nobody calls 911 when white Jews birdwatch in the park. White Jews do not live in fear with each and every encounter with the police. And our privilege goes beyond the day-to-day. It is generational. For example, my paternal grandparents moved from New York City to Eastchester, New York, in the late 1940s. They were able to buy a home in the emerging suburb in Westchester County for something around $16,000. By the time they retired, there was considerable equity in that property. That, coupled with their hard work and achievement, enabled them to retire comfortably and still leave an inheritance for their children. A black couple looking to move their family to the suburbs did not have the same opportunity. Redlining and other discriminatory practices prevented the purchase of a home in many neighborhoods and made it much more difficult to achieve this type of middle-class life for themselves and for subsequent generations. Dr. Peggy McIntosh wrote, "I think whites are carefully taught not to recognize white privilege, so I have begun in an untutored way to ask what it is like to have it. I have come to see it as an indivisible package of unearned assets that I can count on cashing in each day, but about which I was meant to remain oblivious. White privilege is like an invisible, weightless knapsack of special provisions, maps, passports, code books, visas, clothes, tools, and blank checks. I know that addressing our privilege is uncomfortable, but that is what Yom Kippur compels us to do, taking off our masks to make us vulnerable, so we can have a deep internal investigation of who we are and who we want to be. Throughout the next 24 hours of Yom Kippur, we will recite the Al-Chet, the confessions of sins, multiple times. In the litany of these sins, we say Al-Chet, for the sin we have committed before you inadvertently, and for the sin we have committed before you, knowingly or unknowingly. even if we are unaware of how our privilege impacts others. This public confession compels us to pause and take stock. In Leviticus, in the same verse where we read about the biblical name of Yom Kippur, Yom HaKippurim, we also read, on this day you shall afflict your soul. The Or L'Chaim, a Hasidic work, understands the Hebrew word for afflict, the itnatem, as the anitem, meaning to respond. It teaches us that on Yom Kippur, you should raise the voice of your soul and call it out loud. On Yom Kippur, we need to make sure the masks are not covering our eyes so that we can see how significant a role race still plays in our daily lives. We talk a lot about what it means to be Jewish, but not a lot about what it means to be white. Understanding our privilege is a critical step in a process that can lead towards increasing racial equality. But it's only one step, with more to follow. A step that can't stop with acknowledgement. We also have to take steps to dismantle the inequalities in our communities and our country. We must examine ourselves, educate ourselves, and deeply listen to voices around us. Tomorrow, during our 3:30 Yom Kippur learning session, we will have the opportunity to hear from people of color in our temple community. This year, thanks to the commitment of our past president, David Buckman, we are also developing a relationship with the Guiding Star Church in Roselle, and we continue to strengthen our relationship with St. Mark's Church in Plainfield. And in the spring, we look forward to welcoming Brian Stevenson to Temple Emanu-El to learn about his work at the Equal Justice Initiative. Through these and other relationships, we have the ability to listen, to learn, and start building connections. Rabbi David Stern, who was born in Westfield when his father, Jack Stern, was rabbi at Temple Emanu-El, urges the God who heard the cry of the oppressed requires us to listen to the narratives of racism, to exposures of privilege and educational inequities and mythical meritocracies. We do not need to agree with everything we hear, but we need to hear it. And when that hearing produces pain, then we need to feel it. And if that pain motivates us to create a more just and safe society, instead of silencing the truths that disturb us, we know that we have broken through the silence towards hope. As we take off our masks this year, my prayer, my hope, is that we do not just take them off on Yom Kippur and put them back on Tuesday. This work is hard. This work is uncomfortable. And in the words of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, unconscious bias is one of the hardest things to get at. Yet, we can commit to being vulnerable, taking a deep look at our privilege, and making that self-reflection a first step to fighting for equality. We can and we must raise the voice of our soul and call it out loud. Kain Yahi Ratzon, may this be God's will.